And Cyrus, I know you can't joke about this, but you kind of got the hat trick of autoimmune diseases, didn't you?
I know. Yeah, I scored, man. I got three. I'm 3 for 3 at this point. Bring it on.
Three
I'll
for
take
three.
whatever.
And they all came in rapid succession kind of later when you were 22. You were a
Yeah,
senior at Stanford.
I
And
was basically a senior at Stanford. I was just trying to graduate, and I got within 6 months, I got Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, then alopecia, and then type 1 diabetes. Bam, bam, bam. And I was like,
bam, bam, bam.
I don't understand what's happening. Please, someone explain.
Did anybody ever explain? Have you figured it out?
No, there is no explanation for it because doctors don't really have a very firm grasp on what causes autoimmunity in general. So you could basically take any autoimmune condition. You could say, "Hey, doctor, even you can even go to a rheumatologist. Say, hey, what causes Hashimoto's hypothyroidism?" And they'll tell you, "Oh, well, it's when your antibodies are blah blah blah." And you're like, "No, no, no. What causes it?" And they don't know the answer. Say, what causes MS? Don't know the answer. What causes type 1 diabetes? What causes Crohn's disease? What causes celiacs? Don't know the answer.
You were going to go be a mechanical engineer at NASA, and then type 1 diabetes happened, and that changed your life, and off you went to Berkeley to get your PhD?
Yeah, so I actually did work at NASA for 2 years. So what happened was that I graduated Stanford. I went to work at NASA for 2 years as an aeronautical engineer, and I was at the NASA Ames Research Center right in your backyard. So I was living in the local area. I was working there, and I was kind of like split in my head because on one hand I was doing engineering, which is what I loved, but then on the other hand I had this like personal experiment where I was changing my diet and trying to figure out why my insulin sensitivity was changing so rapidly and trying to find an optimal way to be able to control my blood glucose using a combination of food and reduced insulin use. So this was this like fascinating biological experiment and then my like engineering work. And as I was going through this process, I was just like, you know what? I wish I knew more about biology because then I could put a little bit more of an analysis, like a rigorous analysis and understanding like what's actually happening inside of like how is my thyroid gland talking to my pancreas? Are they even communicating with each other? How's my brain talking to my muscles? Is my liver communicating with my gut, you know? And so in the process of working at NASA, I just started picking up books. I just started reading about nutritional biochemistry and molecular and cellular biology. And then I went to I enrolled in getting prerequisite coursework so that I could like really study towards a PhD program. And then after I had 2 years of work underneath my belt, I then applied for, I applied to like 5 or 6 different schools across the country. And I went to Berkeley, and there at Berkeley I ended up meeting one of the world's authorities on carbohydrate metabolism, Mark Hellerstein, who is without question one of the smartest human beings on this planet. I mean, that guy is just it's a ridiculous. He's like literally, he's Goodwill Hunting, like a real life version of Goodwill Hunting.
Rational, honest discussion, and going going for the data solves the problem.
He's so smart that when he talks, probably similar to Steve Jobs in some contexts, where he's so smart that when he talks, I literally was like scribbling things down so I wouldn't forget them. And then I have to go study them afterwards. And I was like, what is he talking about? I don't understand, right? Anyway, long story short, I got to work with him for 5 years. And that kind of taught me how to think. And then since that moment, since he knew my personal story, we were doing a bunch of carbohydrate metabolism biology experiments in, laboratory mice and rats, and just really investigating insulin resistance more and deeper. When I graduated, I ended up meeting Robby somewhere around that same time and recognized that he was living, he was the only other human being that I knew who was living with type 1 diabetes and had transitioned to a plant-based diet. So we were living like parallel lives effectively. And at that point I was like, oh shit, like why don't people know this information? I mean, I can sit here and I can drone on about the research all day long, but like, it doesn't matter because people don't understand what to do. They just go on Instagram and they find ketogenic diets and that's what they do. So like, what if we were to try and create something that actually impacted real people? And the two of us joined forces to do it. And I'm so glad we did because it's touched a lot of people's lives at this point. And
Yeah.
we're only getting started to a certain extent.
Yeah, it really has. And Robby, you got diabetes when you were 12, 14, something like that?
Yeah, I was actually, I was 12 and I was just about to turn 13. So it was January 26th of 2000. And I'll never forget the day. My older brother actually also has type 1 diabetes. So I was very familiar with the condition.
Steven.
And that's right, Steven. You do your research, Chris. So Steven.
9 years older, right?
That's exactly right. I love it. So I self-diagnosed myself. I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I'm pretty sure I have diabetes, just like Steve. I'm thirsty all the time. I'm going to the bathroom like crazy. She said, No, don't be silly. You don't have diabetes. I said, okay. I just continued with my life. And she was out of town. We were living in Minnesota at the time. My mom and dad were in Florida looking for homes because we were going to move to Florida. And she calls to check in and she says, Hey, how you doing? I said, well, last night I was cramping. I couldn't sleep. She said, okay, go upstairs, use your brother's meter and test yourself. And I was well over 400. And as a person who is non-diabetic, you really shouldn't be above 140. So right then and there, my brother said, yep, you have type 1 diabetes. Pack your bag. You're going to be in the hospital for a few nights. So we went to the general doctor first. Then we went to the hospital. And my parents came back the next day. And my dad just said, hey, it's just an inconvenience. You can still accomplish whatever you want in your life. And I think I received a great benefit of being the second person who was diagnosed with type 1 because my parents were already familiar with it. They knew it's going to be okay. So I did get to receive a benefit there in the beginning. And I appreciated that.
So what are the odds that it would happen to two brothers in the same family? Is there any kind of familial grouping of the disease, or is it just
that's a great question.
100,000 people are diagnosed every year? So
yeah, I don't know the statistics, but I'm sure there is some sort of connection, but I don't remember the statistics very well. I'd have to look them up, Chris.
So in your book, you both said, as I was feeling sorry for you reading your stories, and then you both came out and said, no, diabetes is one of the best things that ever happened to you. I was like, what? Did I read that right? So explain yourselves.
No doubt. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of people think about diabetes as this unfortunate condition that they either were predestined to receive because it's within their family lineage. You hear people say this all the time now. Say, oh, well, my dad had type 2 diabetes, therefore I know I'm going to get it. My grandfather and my grandmother both had type 2 diabetes, therefore it's in my family, right? So people have this mindset that if it's present in your parents or your grandparents, then it will happen to you. It's just a question of time. And then people who have type 1 diabetes or type 1.5 diabetes, the sort of adult onset version of type 1 diabetes, they suffer from an autoimmune reaction like we talked about, and the autoimmune reaction is something that just kind of literally happens to you one day. And there's nothing that you can do to predict whether or not you're going to develop an autoimmune blood glucose problem. It just sort of happens, and before you know it, all of a sudden your glucose is alarmingly high. You go to the doctor, you end up in the hospital, you're in diabetic ketoacidosis, and now all of a sudden you have to inject insulin. So there's this feeling like, it's kind of inevitable. And it's going to happen to you one day. But the genetic argument is true only in the case of type 1 autoimmune diabetes. So there is a strong linkage between, if your parent had it, your chances of developing type 1 diabetes are significantly increased. Does it mean it's going to happen? No, not necessarily, because it's a combination of your genetics plus your environment as well, right? So there's epigenetic programming, which happens from your environment. It determines what types of viruses you're exposed to. It determines what food is in your daily regimen, and it determines what you do on a daily basis. But in the case of type 2 diabetes, most people, again, they think that it's a genetic predetermined condition. There's a genetic predisposition towards developing insulin resistance, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes. But just because a parent had it or a grandparent had it does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that you're going to develop it, because, again, more than autoimmune versions, what you eat, how you take care of your body, what you choose not to eat, how much alcohol you drink, whether you smoke, whether you move your body, how much vitamin D you're exposed to, whether you sleep, whether you're stressed, all of that stuff matters. And so, point being is that the overwhelming majority of people living with any form of diabetes have this feeling that, oh, I just got dealt a bad card, and now I have this thing. And then they become a victim to life with diabetes. And that life with diabetes can then turn into a collection of chronic diseases. Oftentimes people with diabetes end up developing multiple chronic diseases, including hypertension, high cholesterol. Some go on to develop congestive heart failure, coronary artery disease. Some end up with fatty liver disease. Some end up with chronic kidney disease. Some end up with cognitive decline over the course of 20, 30, 50 years. And so it's understandable that emotionally you might feel like you're on this one-way track towards a decreased quality of life. But the truth is that diabetes can become a superpower. And the way that I decided to change my perspective, and the way that Robby has also decided to change his perspective, is to say, you know what? Okay, fine. I got dealt a bad card. No big deal. I woke up one morning and I had type 1 diabetes. Now I have to inject insulin. Woe is me, right? I could literally spend the next 60 years of my life depressed and anxious and frustrated. Or I could just say, you know what? I'm just going to make the best out of this. I'm just going to do whatever I possibly can. I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. And I'm going to try and help out as many other people as I possibly can, because this is actually not that big of a deal, right? When you don't have the answer to a problem, the problem can become a fixation, it can become an anxiety, and it can destroy you mentally. When you work towards finding a solution, then all of a sudden the problem is no longer that big of a problem. It doesn't present as an anxiety, and you can actually truly enjoy your life. So I decided that I was gonna learn everything that I possibly could. And in the process of doing that, I got empowered to recognize that living with type 1 diabetes is truly a superpower, because you carry this blood glucose meter with you, right? Robby has a CGM. Some people have insulin pumps. Some people have blood glucose meters. Some people have insulin pens. It doesn't really matter. Some combination of things that you have on you is telling you what your blood glucose is as frequently as you want it to. And then you also have the tools to be able to control what food you're eating and how much insulin you're dosing yourself if that's necessary for you.